When one thinks of comic books from Marvel and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, perhaps one name that comes to mind first is that of Captain America, Steve Rogers, America's ass. But what if I told you that Steve Rogers was one of many, the product of a top-secret government program that involved German agents, civil and human rights violations, and horrors that have swept through every corner of the Marvel Universe? While it's true that from a publishing perspective, Sam Wilson was the first Black Captain America, this is not the whole story. From a biographical storyline perspective, there was another. This is the story of a super soldier named Isaiah Bradley. Thanks for watching JLS Comics. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. I do upload videos just like this every single week. Alright, let's jump into our story. And our story starts at the end of the American Civil War in the mid-1800s. There was a soldier and a spy named John Steele who had fought bravely in battle for the Union, the North. At some point during this time period, Steele gained super strength, reflexes, and speed, and a factor that slowed down his aging process. It was slowed enough that 50 years later, he also fought in World War I. Toward the end of the quote-unquote war to end all wars, Steele's trench was overrun and he was captured by the Germans. When they discovered his enhanced state, they began experimenting on him, hoping to figure out how he was who he was and apply that to their own soldiers. This effort was a top-secret program under Himmler and the SS called Project Nietzsche. It's an apropos name given Nietzsche's morality of development beliefs and his anti-egalitarian, anti-altruistic, anti-Marxism stances, and how those relate to the methodologies employed in the project. It also refers to the end result, the Übermensch, from 1883's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Inspired by George Bernard Shaw, Thomas Common translated Übermensch as Superman, something that Walter Kaufman would later oppose as it's too similar to the DC Comics Superman character. Ayn Rand, with her objectivism, criticized Nietzscheism. While the two may be similar, they epistemologically diverge where Nietzscheism lacks individualism and hers does not, much in the same way that Nietzsche and the neo-Kantian Schopenhauer diverge in their views on morality. As Axis soldiers, these Übermensch would be products of the state and lacking an inherent individuality. At least, that was the plan. Heading up this project was a scientist named Dr. Abraham Erskine, along with Professors Bruder and Schmidt. When Hitler took power in Germany, he sent Drs. Koch and Erskine to the United States to meet with privately funded eugenicists in the States. Dr. Koch was a biologist and head of Koch Pharmaceuticals based out of Germany. Together, they formed the ideas for super soldiers. Koch had the product, the pipeline, and the Americans had the funding. So the project was split in two. Near the beginning of the Second World War, Erskine defected to the United States with help from Nick Fury. Erskine's identity was changed to Dr. Reinstein, and he continued his research now in the United States. And this branch of the program was called Project Rebirth. This project would later splice in Nathaniel Essex's research that was liberated from near a German concentration camp during the liberation of Germany, and which would grow to be the Weapons Plus program that also involved the CIA, the United States military, and Canada's Department H, and give birth to super soldiers like Logan, aka Wolverine, Deadpool, Nuke, Phantom X, Romulus, Typhoid Mary, and others. Another splinter program from these created the Sentry and the Golden Sentry Serum. Dr. Kudrin brought a variant of the serum targeted to females to Russia's Red Room for the Black Widow program. As I mentioned, it truly touches all corners of the Marvel Universe. So after Erskine defected, Dr. Koch, Eric Schmidt, and Hans Bruder took over Project Nietzsche, continuing their work at the Schwarzbitter concentration camp, using prisoners as test subjects. One of the doctors working there was Dr. Bernstein, and he worked right alongside Bruder and Schmidt, and he witnessed Schmidt being hauled away to Strom prison after his Jewish heritage was discovered. Dr. Bernstein's son Noah continued his father's research many years later using test subjects from Seagate Prison like Jack Daniels and Carl Lucas, aka Luke Cage. So what does this all have to do with Isaiah Bradley? Well, a Nazi spy named Hans Kruger infiltrated Project Rebirth and assassinated Erskine. Though this was the end of Erskine, it was not the end of the US's efforts in genetic and bio-warfare. Dr. Nagel, using the nom de guerre Joseph Reinstein, took over for Erskine as head of the project. When Erskine died, most of his methodologies and the secrets of his proprietary Vita-Rays went with him, so Nagel was trying to recreate and fill in the gaps of what Erskine had developed. A New Yorker named Isaiah Bradley enlisted in the United States Army following the attacks on Pearl Harbor in 1941. So Isaiah left New York and left his wife Faith to begin his basic training at Camp Cathcart in Mississippi sometime in 1942. Just before leaving, Isaiah and Faith had a baby named Sarah Gale. And Sarah would later have a son named Elijah Eli Bradley. a young hero destined to become the Patriot and join the Young Avengers decades later, but we're getting way too far ahead. Dr. Nagel needed test subjects, so he began working with Colonel Walker Price from military intelligence. At Camp Cathcart, Price had Lieutenant Philip Merrick pick 300 soldiers and loaded them onto trucks to ship them to an undisclosed and classified location. Colonel Walker shot Major Brackett, head of Cathcart, in the head, killing him instantly. They then murdered everyone else from Cathcart and erased it from existence. The soldiers on the trucks were forced to participate in Nagel's testing program, which was now called Project Super Soldier. It's a fictional program that paralleled the very real-life and highly unethical Tuskegee experiments for the Tuskegee Study, a study performed on 600 African-American sharecroppers, a disgusting and vile project whose after effects are still felt to this day in deep-rooted mistrust of public health. In the comics, the test subjects' families were told that they had all died in explosions, and so they were, for all intents and purposes, gone to the world. They could be tortured with no oversight and no accountability. So now, without any ties to the outside world, the 300 soldiers were experimented on, tested, and tortured, and by the end of the program, only a couple remained. And their first mission was to go to the Black Forest of Germany to intercept a shipment of medications from Koch Pharmaceuticals, led by Dr. Koch. En route on the HMS Pynchon, Jack Harvey, one of the soldiers, passed away in his bunk. And then in the Black Forest, Damon Larson and other of the soldiers blew up with a grenade. From 300, that left 3 of them: Sergeant Lucas Evans, Maurice Canfield, and Isaiah Bradley. When Maurice's family got the letter saying that falsely he had died, his father, overcome with grief, killed Mrs. Canfield before turning the gun on himself. Later, when the team was stationed in Portugal, Maurice learned of his parents' fate. A racist officer taunted him about this, and his own grief, coupled with his PTSD, took over, and he attacked the LT. Evans and Bradley tried to stop him, but Canfield crushed Evans' skull with a piece of pavement and threw Bradley over a cliff, badly wounding him. So by the end of 1942, the incident left Bradley as the sole survivor of the program. Isaiah Bradley was rapidly deployed on his own to Germany to infiltrate Camp Schwarzbitte and destroy any serums that they may have from Project Nietzsche that might have been delivered from Koch Pharmaceuticals. It was meant to be a support mission for Captain America, but Cap's plane was delayed because of a nasty monsoon in the Pacific Theater. So Bradley was on his own, and just before leaving, he grabbed part of a Captain America costume and an unpainted shield to wear. And the shield bore the symbol of a movement called Double V for Victory. It was an emblem used by the black community at the time as they were fighting on the war front and also for freedom at home. 2 wars needing double victories. Without a helm, he grabbed a piece of blue cloth, cut eye holes in it, and used it as a cowl. This was a covert, unsanctioned suicide mission where, if caught, plausible deniability would step in, and both he and the mission would be officially disavowed. At the camp, Bradley found Dr. Ray Koch and killed the evil scientist with his hands, choking the life right out of the vile professor. He found Koch's House of Horrors, countless bodies cut open and lifeless on slabs of cold hard steel. Bradley was appalled and cried as he set the charges to blow up the lab. He then fought his way through the German soldiers, killing them with his hands, with his shield, and with fallen weapons. But then he took refuge behind a steel door, which turned out to be a gas chamber, and the gases used on the prisoners were used on Bradley, and he passed out. So Bradley was captured by the Germans and brought before the Fuhrer and Goebbels, who tried to get him to turn to their side. Instead, because he said his wife would kill him if he did that, he was sent to Dr. Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz. But a group of freedom fighters rescued Isaiah on the way, and with help from the Belgian underground resistance, they got Isaiah back to Allied forces. The black GIs who were running the supply lines, they got him back, but instead of being greeted as a hero and a POW, he was court-martialed and sent to prison at Fort Leavenworth on a 17-year sentence. In the MCU, his sentence was 30 years for stealing a uniform. Around this time, in fact it was 1945, Steve Rogers disappeared. Unbeknownst to the world, Rogers was chasing Baron Zemo when his plane went down and he was frozen in the ice for decades. This is when the Spirit of 76, a guy named William Naslund, along with Fred Davis, became the new government-appointed and public-facing Captain America and Bucky. When Naslund was killed, the Patriot, Jeffrey Mace, took on the mantle, later dying of cancer, and he was succeeded by William Burnside in the 1950s, along with his Bucky, Jack Monroe, who would go on to be called Nomad. All while Isaiah sat in prison. But he wasn't just sitting there. The experiments didn't stop. They poked and prodded him, studied him, took his blood and other fluids from him, all in an attempt to recreate the super soldier serum. They took his fluids and stole eggs from Faith and artificially inseminated a surrogate female. They attempted this 38 times, and on the 39th try, their surrogate mother brought to term a baby that would be called Josiah X. This mother escaped the program with the infant Josiah and took him to Faith, who was now living in Virginia with her daughter Sarah Gale. This is when they did a little switch. Faith yelled at the mother to put on a show for the agents monitoring the house, but secretly they swapped the baby with one of Sarah's dolls, so she sent the mother away with the doll. And that night, Faith and Sarah put the baby on a train with a note on the blanket saying, "My name is Josiah." And so Isaiah's son Josiah grew up in an orphanage near Boston, Massachusetts. Josiah would grow up and join the U.S. Army, where he was sent to fight in the Vietnam War. But after punching one of his superiors who was being racist, Josiah was court-martialed, and this is when they discovered that they had found the long-lost super soldier serum baby. But Josiah ended up escaping and for a time became a mercenary. He also converted to Islam and opened his own mosque in Brooklyn, New York. It was here that Josiah took on the name Justice and joined James Rhodes, the War Machine, and his team called The Crew to take down the 66 Bridge Gang. The Crew was War Machine, Justice, White Tiger, and Junta. Josiah's story aligns with that of Malcolm X, something that was confirmed by Aus, aka Priest, the series writer on The Crew. When Faith had gotten notice that Isaiah had died, she had gone to see the casket, and when it was opened it turned out to be a dead, charred white man, so she knew her husband was somewhere, still alive. She was relentless in her attempts to get her husband back, and she wrote letters to President Eisenhower, regularly requesting he be freed. And on the very same day that President John F. Kennedy was inaugurated, Bradley's sentence was commuted. He got a pardon, but he was sworn to secrecy, not unlike Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel, who was also sworn to secrecy by Kennedy, citing the world not being ready yet for a black hero. And so he went home to live out the rest of his days in retirement. Sadly, even though he was able to go home, the nearly 2 decades in prison, coupled with the harsh chemicals from the project, caused his mental capacities to deteriorate, and he would never be the same again. He now had an equivalent mental capacity to a child, and his wife became his caretaker. The VA would help, but since all the missions and the project were classified, they couldn't confirm his damage was caused from service. Eventually, the Bradleys left Virginia and moved back to the Bronx in New York, which is when they once again came into contact with Josiah, who would visit them periodically. Over the years, Isaiah's mind did come back as much as it could, but he still remained in secret in retirement. And despite that, the black community knew his name, and his legend grew. He was a hero to other heroes like Luke Cage, Monica Rambeau, and Bill Foster. He was a hero and an icon, a force who brushed shoulders with the greats like Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, and Muhammad Ali. T'Challa and Storm invited him to their wedding in Wakanda. Though he was not famous, they knew his name. Years later, Steve Rogers learned of Isaiah from a racist weasel, Philip Merritt, the same one from the camp who picked the 300, who had remnants of Cap costumes still with his other mementos. Cap also visited Colonel Walker Price, who is now the CEO of Coke International, a position he quietly moved into after the World Wars. Steve wanted him to face justice for what he did. Steve used some of his back pay to buy enough shares of Coke International so he could show up at the next shareholder meeting with Walker's newly declassified service records, where he'd be fired and arrested, but instead of standing trial, he committed suicide. Then Steve visited the Bradleys and gave Isaiah the remaining pieces of the Captain America costume as a small thank you. In the wake of Scarlet Witch's M-Day breakdown and the devastation at Avengers Mansion that followed, a young version of the time traveler King the Conqueror named Iron Lad was looking to recruit a new generation of heroes. Iron Lad went to the Bradleys' house trying to find Josiah, but instead found Eli Bradley, Isaiah's grandson. Eli was taking MGH, mutant growth hormone, a superhero version of HGH steroids. Later, the Young Avengers and New Avengers were in a battle with the Skrulls and Kree, and Eli used his body as a shield to protect Captain America. And so Eli was badly wounded, and he required a blood transfusion, so he was sent to a hospital, which is when his grandfather Isaiah gave him his own blood, and so he did in fact become imbued with the super soldier powers from that point on. In 2021's Disney Plus series Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Carl Lumbly plays Isaiah Bradley, a Korean War veteran still haunted by the horrors of war at the hands of a country who used him like an experiment on the field and in the laboratory. He's a forgotten hero from a forgotten war. He was sent in to fight a Hydra-controlled White Wolf, Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, and had torn part of Bucky's robotic arm right off. Until then, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be one of the first to know when I upload videos just like this each and every week. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.